Hello everyone. In the lectionary readings recently, we've been hearing accounts of miracles, and this continues tomorrow with the healing of the daughter of a Gentile woman who argued her case with Jesus. I'll post my sermon on that in the morning. Like many people, I struggled with miracles over the years, but it was eventually the acceptance with understanding that as the Son of God, Jesus could and did perform many acts that were miraculous, that I stopped looking for rational explanations. You know the sort of thing, I'm sure. Yes, 5,000 people were fed by Jesus, but only a handful received a share of the 5 loaves and fishes. Everyone else was fed when those in the crowd with food started to share their food with those around them who had none. Some might think that in itself was a miracle. Walking on water is an easy one. It was a very shallow part of the sea. Lazarus wasn't really dead. He was in cataleptic shock, as was Jesus after the crucifixion, of course. For centuries, people have sought rational explanations for anything that appears miraculous in the eyes of others. It was when I realised that the how of miracles still left many things that couldn't be explained that I started to think about the why of miracles, particularly when regarded by both Jesus and John the Gospel writer not as miracles as we expect to find them, but as signs pointing to something much bigger. It was then that my own thinking changed. John ends his Gospel with these words, "But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written." So many other things. Each Gospel writer would have selected those stories which accorded to the purpose of his own narrative. The first sign that John records is the wedding at Cana. The good wine could have been hidden by a bunch of larky lads, friends of the groom maybe, who thought it would be funny. But that still doesn't explain how Mary knew to tell Jesus to do something. She knew that his time had come. Why did Jesus do that in that place, to the benefit of the steward and the host? What was the bigger picture? What was the motive? Jesus was moved by compassion for those whose circumstances led to their isolation from community, and they were healed in a way that led them to being included once more. It's also the case that Jesus often told those who'd been healed not to tell anyone at all about the source of their healing. He didn't want to become known as a wonder worker. At Cana, nothing was said, but the steward knew something miraculous had happened that had spared the host humiliation and possibly something worse for himself. Mary knew, and the expression "to keep mum" was never more apt. There are deeper interpretations, of course, but not for now. It was reading this book many years ago that opened my eyes to the miracles in a different way. Written by Jeffrey John, the meaning of the miracles addresses that question, why? Why is this story told in this way? Why has this story been included just here? What does this story say to us today? I can't recommend this book too highly. It's very readable. Actually, it's unputdownable, which is saying something about scholarly theology. If we struggle with miracles, it's helpful to remember that the disciples did too. It's when we start to think why instead of how that we can begin to see more clearly. And the healing of the blind man is a particularly relevant place to start. Jesus and the disciples are at Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" "John the Baptist, Elijah, other prophets," they reply. Then Jesus asks "Who do you say I am?" Peter replies, "You are the Messiah." So far, so good. But Peter then refuses to accept that Jesus must suffer and die. You may remember what Jesus says to him: "Get behind me, Satan." Peter only got half the message. Peter hadn't taken note of what had just happened in Bethsaida when Jesus cured a blind man. At first the man says he can see sort of people walking a bit like trees. And then as a second attempt, Jesus brings him to a point when he can see everything clearly. Peter hadn't understood that maybe he'd seen something, but he'd missed the whole picture. He saw what he wanted to see and closed his eyes to what he couldn't accept. In our own time, miracles still speak to us. What are we blind to? As an example, we could perhaps think about homelessness. We can see a homeless person in a doorway on a cold winter night, but we can see only partially. We don't see the full picture. We don't feel the vulnerability. We don't shiver with the cold. We don't feel dirty. We don't feel scorned. We don't feel the shame of feeling, as did afflicted people during the time of Christ, that misfortune, unhealth, disabilities are somehow our fault and a punishment. This is only one example, but I hope you can perhaps think about miracles as having a why at the heart of them, a heart that has never stopped beating. I'm going to read a verse of a much-loved hymn as a prayer for today. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Naught be all else to me save that thou art. Thou my best thought in the day and the night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Amen. Until the next time, goodbye for now. Goodbye.